Alright, so I have been eagerly awaiting these packages from Wiring Specialties. This one should be containing my harness for a VVTi 2JZ, and it's set up specifically for an E36 chassis, so it should fit perfectly. Let's see what we got in here. We got our little Wiring Specialties catalog and some pinouts for CAN bus, pinout for the ECU. So we've got our harness. It comes in several pieces. There's going to be a sub harness for like the coils, a nice grommet for where it goes through the firewall. Here's our O2 connector. The wideband also comes with some extra pins and stuff like that, just in case you mess some stuff up. And this guy is going to be our ECU. ECUMaster EMU Classic with CAN bus. ECUMaster ECU are two plugs for the inputs and outputs. That's what the pinout that came with the harness was specifically for. So this little guy is for our manifold air pressure, and this is the CAN bus. So that also comes with a bunch of extra pins and your cable for the computer. Alright, so this is the drift car. This is my 1996 E36 328IS 2JZ GTE VVTi engine. Now I've already removed the old harness, so this should be relatively easy to install the new one. So the first thing you're going to do is remove the upper part of the intake manifold. I've already removed mine because I removed the harness earlier. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is kind of take a look at the harness, drape it over the motor, and start to read some of these wires and figure out where exactly on the engine they're going to go. I'm going to have to feed this guy through behind my intake manifold, right next to the brake booster, and most of these guys are going underneath the intake manifold or feeding through the intake manifold and going to the injectors, so that's where I'm going to go with this. Now some of these I'm not going to be using, like flex fuel and oil temp. As soon as I have provisions for those things, I can obviously plug them in, but for right now I'm just going to be coiling them up and zip tying them so they're out of the way so I can use them later. Alright, so one of the first wires I'm coming to is our NOx sensor, which is right about here. And all these wires are labeled real nicely, so you can pretty much figure out where everything goes with relative ease. Alright, first plug, only 900 to go. Now I've got a couple of grounds as well as the starter wire and the signal wire for the starter. So those two I'm just going to leave down there. I'm going to wait until I jack up the car to do that. We have a ground that's going to go to the intake manifold up here, and the rest of these wires are just going to get fed in between the runners on the intake manifold and go to the injectors. So, the next things that are going to get plugged in are the injectors. Set aside this ground and starter wire, as well as the signal wire, and the rest of these guys are number 6. As the CAN position sensor. Number 5. Alright, our next bunch of things is we've got another ground, also going to go to the intake manifold, a couple of detector wires, and then our number 1 knock sensor wire. Got our number 3 injector. We'll feed all these in between the runners on the intake manifold. VVTI solenoid wire. Need a number 2 injector here. I'm just going to put a bolt through these 2 grounds so I don't forget about them later. Because I am going to have to come back to them. Our number 1 knock sensor. The rest of this bundle is going to be going on the other side of the engine, so it's just going to drape right through the middle, in between the cam gears and the valve covers. And on this one, we have our boost solenoid, which I won't be using yet. Our plug for the alternator, as well as the inlet air terminal. So we've got our coolant temperature sensor. Then we have our alternator plug right here. Sometimes if you don't hear it click, you might as well give it a little tug just to make sure it's seated fully. And this is our crank position sensor. So the next thing I'm going to install is the sub harness for my coils, using stock VVTI coils. So there's only 3 plugs. Plug into the main harness. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is connect the power wire as well as the signal wire to the starter.
Yeah, fan relay. And then that's about the only labeled one. Other than that, no label.
Yeah, I don't know.
One's a power, one's a ground. And then there was the other one.
Yeah, I mean they're all, I have a pin out for them and everything. Alright, and that's that. Alright, so I'm back to work on the E36. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to drill a hole in the downpipe so I can put an O2 bung into it because the stock O2 bung is not going to work because it's a 2-bolt kind of a thing instead of a normal thread-in O2. So it's a Bosch wideband. So you can install that now. Yeah. Alright, so it's important to remember to remove your one of your battery leads just to make sure you don't fry anything before welding anything on a vehicle. It's just a general rule, and I just waited for the O2 bung to cool down a little bit, but you don't need to worry about it too much because these things are designed to handle 1,000 plus degrees of heat. So alright, so as you can see right here, I cut a hole in my little firewall cover plate here so I could feed the rest of the harness. So I could feed the rest of the harness through the firewall without having to unplug anything. Now that was my plan from the beginning, but if you plan to stick your harness through a hole that's in your firewall, maybe like the one down here right by your, like where your battery cable comes through. If you plan on sticking your harness through a hole like that, then you might want to do it in the beginning before you plug everything in. You may or may not be able to feed it through afterwards. I'm going to get rid of all of this old wiring that went from my relay panel over to my ECU over there. And once I get all that removed, I will be able to wire up my flying leads and plug in the ECU. Here's the plug for the wideband O2 sensor. All I did was plug that in and kind of zip tie it out of the way so it wouldn't, fall in the exhaust and melt. Because I have all the coils plugged in already, I put on the coil cover, and next I should be able to put on the intake manifold and plug the last few things in. What I've been working on right now is the harness interface connector. So basically this is the connector that has all the flying leads that are going to be either an input or an output. So right now what I'm doing is determining what I do and do not need, because I'm not running a lot of things that this harness is capable of. So basically I don't have a tach, I don't have an air conditioning, I don't need a reverse. I already have a coolant temperature gauge, an oil pressure gauge, and I don't have air conditioning and speed sensor is unnecessary, and fuel pump trigger, I already have that wired up to my relay panel. So basically all I'm going to be using off of this connector is these two wires, and one is for start signal and the other one is for ignition switch 12 volt power. The black wire will go to my starter relay and the red wire will go to my ignition relay. Alright, so we're on the home stretch. I'm going to finish installing the intake manifold. I got it mostly installed the other night. Made sure none of the wiring was getting pinched in between there, which it almost did, because there's some extra wiring built into these harnesses, so you have room for everything, just in case you decide to cut it and put in different plugs or something like that for injectors and stuff. And I made a little mount down here that I'll show you in a minute, but the ECU sits right here against this wall, kind of covering up that ugly hole a little bit. Alright, so my little diagram I got here. So when you're looking at this, originally I made the mistake of looking at this end of the plug and trying to figure out where these wires go, which none of them matched up. And then I realized that I had to look at this side of the plug, the harness side, like the side directly connected to the harness that you can't remove. So that's what you should be going off of, and it says the black wire all the way over on the left. Black start signal, that's A. So this one's A and it's black. You follow that through the plug. This is the corresponding wire. So what I'm going to do is put a terminal on this guy, as well as put a terminal on these two guys, which this one is from my harness for ignition, and this one is from the Wiring Specialties harness for ignition. So both of those are going to go to the ignition relay. So one last thing before we hop out of here, I'm gonna attach this vacuum line to the ECU. There's a little port right here for the manifold air pressure. So instead of running the manifold air pressure with a plug directly off of the manifold, this ECU has a built-in 4 or 4.5 bar sensor. All you have to do is run a vacuum line to it. So the last couple of things I'm going to do are hook up this vacuum line, which we just fed through the firewall. Just got to cut it to the length and pop it on. I installed that on where the original manifold air pressure sensor was, but you can install it anywhere on the intake manifold. I'm also going to add a couple of these little caps to some of these openings where there were vacuum lines, but we're not using them anymore. If you're not doing a true twin setup as far as the turbos go, then you might not have to do that, but if you are, you will. Alright, so what I've got is a 2JZ GTE VVTi in an E36, and I've got the Wiring Specialties harness for this chassis, an ECUMaster EMU Classic, and the harness is also set up to work along with my relay panel that I have here for the switch panel. So the way I did it is feed the wiring through the Firewall, remove the top half of the intake manifold so you can reach all the plugs and stuff, unplug all the old stuff, plug in the new stuff, injectors, cam sensor, the throttle position sensor, as well as knock sensors and the starter wire, all of which would be in there, but you can't see it. In the air temperature sensor, this is not a sensor, but it's the actuator for the VVTi. You have the coolant temperature and the alternator and crank sensor that are down there. And I had to add an O2 bung to my exhaust, but I screwed in the O2, the wideband, and plugged in the O2 sensor. And all of these little extra things are just that, they're extra. So I could run a flex fuel as well as oil pressure and temperature and fuel pressure off of all those plugs. So I'm not going to use those for right now, but I might later, so it's good to have them. I've also got the vacuum line that I ran from the ECU all the way to the intake manifold, so that gets rid of my map sensor completely. And if you're running a different ECU, you might not have that, but you might run a map sensor, an aftermarket one. So I have everything all plugged up, ready to go. There's the chassis ground for the harness, and looks like we're ready to tune it. So I'm going to call up our tuner guy Ian, and he's going to get the ECU all set up, and we'll do a couple of street pulls and get it to a nice safe tune, and hopefully we won't run into any issues. So I'll keep you guys updated, and we'll get it all sorted out sometime this coming week. The ECU is all installed, as well as the wiring harness. The last thing we got to work on is the tuning. So our guy Ian sent me a startup map. So what I'm going to do is, first step is to download the ECU software so we can actually use the computer. And then as soon as we get that software downloaded, you can just go to their website to find that. Whatever ECU you have, you can just go to their website and download whatever software it is, unless they send a software disk with the ECU. So the next step would be connect the computer to your ECU and put in the startup map. So that's what I'm going to do next. Hey guys, so we finished up the tuning process on the BMW, and got it all put together, got it tech ready, and finally it made its way to the track. We just got back from Sonoma Raceway. We're cleaning up some tires and everything, but the Wiring Specialties harness worked flawlessly. I was really happy to get it out of the shop for the first time in a while, because I was dealing with electrical issues. So if you are thinking about getting a harness, I would highly recommend a Wiring Specialties harness. Cuts out all of the problems that you could run into. So I hope this video has helped you guys out, and if you have any more questions on the install, you can always go to wiringspecialties.com, and they have a full comprehensive guide on how to install their harness. Yeah, hope you guys like it. Thanks.